Any other questions about chat or about Q&A before we go? So Charis and Elizabeth will be able to share their screen with you, so then that way they will see your slides. Let's see. Any other questions before we go? If you were not here before or during worship, make sure that you introduce yourself, so then that way we know who is here, and so then that way we can welcome you into our learning community. All right, so I think we should be good to, oh, we have another question. So with our wonderful eFormation all online, it came about because last year we had a building project at VTS, which meant that we couldn't hold our normal conference in person. So we turned to this all online format because of the technology of Zoom and because we really wanted to be able to gather together as a community, not only to share the best resources, but then to also really be a learning community, to learn from each other and to support each other in all that we're doing. Much like Samuel, we may not be paying attention to God's call to us, which is why it's important that we come together as a community, so that way we can listen to other people and see where God is calling us, not only as an individual, but also as a cohort, as a ministry and leadership cohort. So, without further ado, I'm really excited to bring our first workshop as part of our all-day, all-online conference. So Charis serves as a Director of Communications and editor of Episcopal Church Foundation Vital Resources. Before moving to New York, Charis worked for the Council for World Missions in Singapore as Communications Manager and at Dorling Kindersley Publishers in New Delhi as Senior Editor. At ECF, she is focused on strategic internal and external communications, as well as the editorial responsibilities of ECF Vital Practices. While Charis has always enjoyed working in marketing and communications, her heart lies in social media, new media, and writing. So welcome to Charis. And Elizabeth is our Associate for Communications at Virginia Theological Seminary. So she is actually just up in the next building over. So I'm lucky to have her as my colleague. Elizabeth has a degree in communications and public relations and was the former liturgy administrator at St. Columba's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. So she is a lifelong Episcopalian, also does a side gig working at St. John's Lafayette Square as their communications associate. And she and her husband live right next to the convention center in D.C., where they see all sorts of fascinating, interesting things. So without further ado, I will go ahead and hand over the reins to Charis and Elizabeth. I will be back in order to ask them your questions. So be prepared, your questions will get answered. So I look forward to learning from the two of you. So Charis and Elizabeth.
All right, good morning, everybody. Like Sarah said, my name is Elizabeth Panox-Leach, and I work as a communications director associate at Virginia Theological Seminary. I'm going to take 1 second to just share my screen very quickly. Share screen. Thank you. So. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen and see this lovely GIF of people's hands on a phone. So today we're going to talk about Social Media 101. We're going to talk about an overview of everything that you could possibly want to know as a basic information resource. So this is Charis and myself. We've been introduced. Charis, do you want to talk about Episcopal Church Foundation really quickly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I work at ECF. Like Sarah said, I'm the Director of Communications here. I've been here about 3 years now. ECF was founded in 1949. We work with congregations and organizations across the country on strategy, on financial resources, and on leadership development. I encourage you to just take a look at our website when you get a chance. We do a whole bunch of different things and across different areas. So looking forward to this today.
And Virginia Theological Seminary was founded in 1823 to form men and women for lay and ordained leadership within community. So approximately 75% to 80% of people who attend VTS live on campus, as do all faculty. We have a mission to provide a continuing theological education for clergy and laity in the Episcopal Church, to serve the Anglican Communion and the wider church, to provide an ecumenical, international, and cross-cultural context for theological education, to be an outstanding theological resource for students, scholars, the church, the larger public, and to be a racially and ethnically diverse community when living out the mission. Please do also visit our website to learn more about us. So today we're going to cover social media. What is it? Why should we be using it? Talking about audiences and which platforms appeal to specific demographics, because there's approximately 5 different generations living right now that we're all trying to reach at any time. Charis is going to touch on strategy, why it should be your first step in creating a communications plan in social media, talking about storytelling and then best practices, and we have some resources at the end for you to kind of continue your journey in learning about social media. So what is social media? So if you're not following Merriam-Webster on Twitter, you should be, because they have a great social media game right now. But the definition is forms of electronic communication, such as websites for social networking and microblogging, through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content like videos. The first known use of social media was in 2004. So in 2004, the Facebook was launched at Harvard University by Mark Zuckerberg. You'll see on the left. On the right, you'll see Tom Anderson, who founded MySpace in 2003. And interestingly, nobody calls it the Facebook anymore, because Facebook took the concept of a print directory and turned it into an all-encompassing platform. Facebook's redefined and taken ownership of that idea, and that is the power of social media. So, how has social media, how has the internet and social media changed? So everybody kind of remembers this login screen, right? You would sit and wait, agonizing, taking forever, the long noise and the beeps, slow download speeds. 1997 saw the first social media site, which is the now defunct 6 Degrees, which was run through AOL. This is a time when many people in the world began to build online personas through chat rooms like IRC or Internet Relay Chat, through listservs, through low-tech website builders like GeoCities, may it rest in peace, and AOL Instant Messenger. So we evolved from the static. So this is the MySpace kind of layout that we all remember. When MySpace launched in 2003, as I said, followed quickly by Facebook. These services were and are until recently pretty static because we were tied to our desktops and laptops. With the shift to handheld and mobile tech, our online lives have become more dynamic. We experience social media in real time and not just when we can log on to a computer. So more dynamic. Now that we're no longer relying on a fixed connection to being able to access whenever and wherever, social media use has exploded. Legacy platforms have changed too, like Facebook. Over the last 5 or so years, Facebook has moved to model features originally found on Instagram and Snapchat, like the stories function, like the disappearing messages. And for example, look how easy it is to turn on the camera in Facebook. Every time you swipe left just a little bit too far, you're right there with the camera on. And Facebook always seems to find a way to turn that video on too, right? When you don't want it to happen, when you haven't brushed your hair yet in the morning or something. So across the board, today's social media networks generally have these characteristics. They're user-based. So before Facebook and MySpace were launched, content was updated by one user and read by visitors to their site. So it was a pretty much a one-direction flow of information. And the direction of future updates was determined by the person who owned that information, be it a webmaster or a content writer. Online social networks, on the other hand, are built and directed by users. And so without users, the network would be empty. And we populate, and so we are sort of the product. So that's something to remember also with data. It's free because we are the product and what that means. And as we have a larger discussion about big data, Cambridge Analytics and things like that. It's interactive. That means that it's not just a collection of forums or text. There's gaming applications, there's sharing spaces, and they're quickly becoming a pastime that people turn to more than traditional models like television and cable. They're community-driven. Social groups around the world are founded based on the fact that members hold common beliefs. So even though You know, Charis is in New York and I'm in Washington, D.C. Our love of social media has connected us, and we can find that information online and share it with people. So discovering new friends. And you can even reconnect with people that you lost contact with long ago, as many of us have experienced with people from high school friending us and wanting to share all kinds of things from their lives with us. They are relationship-based as community-based. So you have just 20 contacts, but you publish a note and then it can proliferate and be shared. And that's kind of like the basis of viralism and viral videos and things like that, and viral messages. And finally, emotionally focused content. The websites of the past were primarily focused on just providing information, but now we can actually in real time share how we're feeling at that moment and in that time frame. And you can jump online and just communicate that information to whoever you want, whenever you want. So it's definitely a different world. So I'm gonna move on. So audiences. I'm gonna keep to this kind of generational breakdown. This is sponsored by Pew Research, who actually just put out a study on social media in 2018, about 2 weeks ago. So baby boomers are one of the biggest generations that we all are talking about all the time, born between 1946 and 1964. Generation X was born between 1965 and 1981. The famous or infamous millennials, born between 82 and 96. And the new, and not shown in this graphic because they're so young and new, are Generation Z or post-millennials. They were born between 1997 and 2016. So they're starting to hit 18 years old, starting to become adults and kind of feel out what their space will be in this world. So we're gonna talk about audiences for specific user platforms. So Facebook has 2 billion monthly active visitors. That is a place where you definitely are going to want to keep a lot of focus in creating your content and your strategy, as Charis will talk about in a couple of minutes. They visit the site with high levels of frequency. About 74% of Facebook users say that they visit daily. And around half say they visit, half of that say they visit several times in a day. Of course, as you know, they allow you just to directly connect with one another through groups, through social networks like your college or your work and your location. And there's a pretty much cross-market appeal, except Generation Z. Generation Z is kind of shying away from Facebook because their parents and their grandparents and their teachers are there, and they kind of are trying to build a new space for themselves in the social world. Next is YouTube. YouTube is the second most used search engine after Google, which I guess makes sense. Google does also own YouTube. I wonder why that is, and you know, we can have a discussion about that in the affinity groups later to talk about why we think that YouTube has driven search that high on their platform. They're great because they can allow you to embed video in a blog or a Facebook post and have that cross connection. And the appeal is that they're easy to find niche communities for certain videos. There's generally worldwide appeal and availability, except if you have copyrighted content. We've all tried to watch Britain's Got Talent and been pushed away by BBC, things like that. And of course, this really does appeal to millennials and Generation Z, especially because it's a great place to go for how-tos. I can't tell you how many things in my house I have broken where I've just been like, somebody on YouTube has made a video and I can find information pretty quickly on how to fix this. The average user spends at least 23 minutes a day on YouTube. So there's lots of opportunities for screen time to really share about your community. Next, we have more image-based platforms, which would be Snapchat and Instagram. So Snapchat, it disappears after 24 hours, which is a little uncomfortable for me, but it appeals mostly to Generation Z with some young millennials tagging onto that. I'm 31, so I'm an old millennial, so I'm a little bit averse to it. There's a really high level of frequent interaction with Generation Z. There's 71 of them access it at least more than once per day. It's really unknown to a lot of social media managers at nonprofits and with nonprofit stakeholders. Snapchat has the Discover platform for corporate, so you can find BuzzFeed content there, but really a lot of that is being reshared from more static websites. With Instagram, it's image-based, but it can be considered image-based almost to the point of perfection. And it, of course, appeals to millennials and Generation Z. It has lower levels of frequent interaction with Generation Z. 55% access it more than once per day. And it is widely embraced by both corporate and nonprofits, but this also might be driving some younger users away as it might not be considered as authentic. The irony also is that Snapchat and Instagram are in ways becoming similar platforms. Instagram does stories in a similar way to Snapchat, as does Facebook, because Facebook owns Instagram. They're shifting social media more and more away from text and towards images with graphics and images and banners, which do attract more traffic and interest rather than just text or text with an image. And this is becoming true on Facebook as well. And finally, Twitter. It's sort of like microblogging. So I don't know if you've heard, but it used to be 140 characters and that was it. Within the last 3 or 4 months, they've upped it to 280 characters. And it allows users to subscribe to others' content, send direct messages, and reply publicly. So there's a lot of chance for real conversation to happen in real time about a subject. Using hashtags was born on Twitter and has moved over to Facebook and Instagram. But those hashtags, the pound sign and then a word or a phrase, can share content about related subjects. A really great way to think about that is Giving Tuesday and how that kind of has exploded as a movement online in terms of charitable giving at the end of the calendar year. And Twitter can also be integrated with other platforms, but we can also always need to be careful to not oversaturate. So we're not putting every single Twitter post on Facebook and vice versa, because the audience will lose interest because they are seeing the same content over and over. And in general, this appeals to millennials and Generation X. So the platform domination. The two platforms that dominate overall are YouTube and Facebook. The percentage of adults that say they use these social media sites on their cell phones, 73% were on YouTube and 68% were on Facebook, and that is only growing and growing every single day as more and more people get smartphones and more people kind of move their lives online. There's a lot of overlap though. So when polled, people would say, I definitely visit Facebook every day and YouTube, but I also am on Instagram and LinkedIn, or I also am on Twitter and Snapchat. And so more and more people, something like 3/4 of people use at least one other social media platform at least weekly. And that is, oops, that's it for me. I'm gonna pass it over to Charis. So I'm gonna stop my share, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen now.
Did you want to answer some questions now, or did you want to wait till the end?
If it's okay, I'll just wait till the end and I'll let Charis finish.
Absolutely, just wanted to check in.
Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone, and I apologize for the mess behind me. We're beginning to prepare and pack for General Convention, and so things are crazy here. I'm sure a lot of you are as well. Say hey in the chat box if you're stressed about General Convention like I am. So just picking up from what Elizabeth was saying, a word about just how people view social media now. For many years when Facebook first came out, and sometimes I still hear this from older people about younger kids having their heads buried in their phones all the time. We're beginning to think of social media now as just almost a digital town square where people gather, have conversations, learn things from each other, build relationships, build friendships with one another. It's been around for so many years now that it really isn't a trend anymore. It's just the way things are. It's how people communicate these days, and where a lot of people are really comfortable sharing things, telling their stories, and learning from others as well. And it really is where people are today and where they go for news, to learn things, and to share things as well. I find the really cool thing for me about social media is that it's a really great leveler. I come from India, which is a place where even now several people don't have access to like fancy phones. But I guess if you're in a place with, you know, even a basic internet connection and a computer screen, you're able to have access to this whole world of information. It's also a great way to communicate instantly with someone. You don't have to wait for feedback. And I think that that's also really cool because you learn about news as it's happening, as it's breaking. And that's very, very different to how news and information was sent out before this. Sorry. Just one sec. Okay, here we are. So social media in the church context. So let's just talk for a minute about who our potential audiences can be if we're thinking about social media in the context of the church. In general, there are sort of two broad categories. One is the people who are already in your church, and social media is a great way to communicate with people who are already in your pews because you can share information about what's going on. You can continue to build and nurture a relationship with people who are already interested in you. But then there's also another group of potential new congregation or new people who you haven't reached. And that group is often harder to work with and to reach. But there obviously is a group of people who would potentially be interested. And when you're putting stuff on social media, it sometimes helps to think of these two different audiences because you're really sharing different kinds of information with each of these groups. Social media strategy. Why is strategy so important before you do anything? I really think that even before you start posting on Facebook or doing anything on Instagram or Twitter or thinking about how you want to go about doing stuff online for your church or for your organization, I think that really the first and most basic step is putting together a strategy. A strategy is basically a document that contains what your goals are, what your focus is, and what you want to accomplish, and sort of what is the rationale behind some of the social media decisions that you're going to be making on a day-to-day basis. It's really important to have a document that sort of grounds you and sort of really puts down what your goals are so that when you're making those day-to-day decisions, you're able to have clarity about what you want to do. You should also think about what your goals are. So for every church or every group, your goals will be very different. It could be you want to really build a strong Facebook presence. It could be you want to share this fantastic new program that has just started at your church and you want to get more people in the community involved. So you really have to think about what your primary goal or mission is, or a few of the main ones, and then really work from there to create goals that align with that mission or what you want to accomplish. When you're thinking about strategy, I think it's also important, and Elizabeth spoke a lot about this, about all the different social media platforms that you can use, because they're all very different. They're all obviously, like we saw, that there are different audiences that work and love different social media platforms. So that's another thing to keep in mind, like who is your audience and who are you trying to reach? And Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of them have also very different ways in which you can share information. So it's also, I think, a good idea to think about your strengths and where you're able to share information or the information you want to share most effectively. And then again, it's also very important to measure what you're doing, because very often we're just posting stuff and you really don't know how people are responding to it. It's usually best to measure both qualitative and quantitative data. So see how many people are engaging with your posts on Facebook, for instance, but also how many people are asking questions or having a conversation. And so those are things that are very helpful to give you a sense of how you're doing. Both Facebook and Twitter have built-in analytics that you can use that are really great, but there are also a bunch of other ones that can really give you a very in-depth look at how you're performing on social media. So like I said, a communication strategy is really a document that's grounded in your organization's mission or vision, and it reflects what your goals are. It states your communications values, goals, and methods. I often get the question, how is a strategy different from a plan? And when you think about it, a strategy is really your first step. It's sort of very, it's very general, but it really lays the groundwork for everything that you're going to do. It sets the big picture, and it sort of sets the tone. With a strategy, the questions you ask are, what are your goals? What is your vision? What would you like to achieve? And with a plan, it's really the more detailed steps of how you're going to execute what your strategy is. So for instance, if your church is having, let's say, a bake sale, the strategy will be, why are you having the bake sale? What is your goal? What are you raising money for? Does that tie in with your mission? And a plan would really be the things like, who's going to be there selling, or what kind of cupcakes are you going to make? So the plan is really is more of the details, but the strategy is what you need to really align what you're doing with the mission of your church or organization. And a strategy is really important to ensure that your overall messaging is consistent with what the mission of your church is. And without a strategy, it's just you're sort of entering a situation without knowing where you want to go with it. You'll get somewhere, but it's not. You're not sure whether that's really where you want it to go. So it really helps to keep coming back to what your mission and vision is. You can tell that I really like memes. Why is a strategy, again, so important? It provides direction, it aligns your messaging, it defines accountabilities, it enhances what your message and what you're trying to say, and it's a framework for you to return to for ongoing decision making. We all know the struggles of having limited resources. And with limited resources, it's even more important to have a very, very clear plan of what you're going to do and what your end goal is. By establishing a plan that everyone is on board with, and that you know is it's a strategy that really ties back to your mission. You know that you're going to create consistent work, and that's building up momentum that is really in line with what you want to achieve long term. It sets the scope of your work, and very often it really helps for a small team to not become overburdened. Another thing is that our audience really receives, like on Facebook, you're constantly bombarded with like 1 million messages every day. Social media really makes it easy for anyone to say anything at any time. And so it can be a very distracting place. And so it's important for us as church communicators to really be clear about what we want to say, and say things that really align with our mission, and so that there's no confusion about it, and so that when you're reaching your audience, they're also getting a message that they can tell is really clear, and it's intentional, and it's what you're going for. The clearer your strategy is, the more likely it is that you're going to reach your goals. And a well-built strategy is always built with the end goal in mind. Let's speak for a minute about just, if you've never done a strategy before and you want to create even a simple one, these 5 questions always really help. So why do you need a strategy? Who do you want to communicate with? Who is your audience? Where will the communication be? And establishing a timeline. So when you want to achieve your goals. The why is basically just analyzing where you are right now, and what's working and what's not working. The what is thinking about what your strengths are, what your message is, what your mission is, and what your primary focus is and what you want to share. Who are your audiences? This is not necessarily different age groups, but it could be where these people are. Are they people, like I said, already in your church? Are they people you're trying to reach who you don't know who they are yet? think about whether you're attracting people from around your neighborhood. Who are you trying to reach? Where will the communication be? Think about which social media platform you really want to focus on. I think that in general, for our audiences, Facebook is really the primary place where most of us put most of our time and budget and effort into. I wouldn't say that, for instance, Snapchat is where we, most of us would put too much time. But think about where your audiences are and where you want to focus your communications on social media. And then, of course, it's really important to establish a timeline for your larger goals and what you want to do with those. Okay, storytelling. So we've spoken about strategy and why that's important to sort of lay the groundwork and have as a place where you can return to and sort of be reminded of what your mission is and what your goals are. So you're always thinking about that, and you're working every day on social media with your strategy in mind. But I think that it's also important to sort of allow yourself to imagine and feel free, and use social media as a place to tell stories, because stories is really one amazing way for people to engage with you and respond to you. And people respond to powerful and well-told stories. Very often we're just sort of, we need to get stuff out, and this, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. We just need to put stuff out. Our Facebook page is inactive, or we've not posted on Instagram in 2 weeks, and you just want to put something there. And that's fine, because sometimes you need to do that. But when you think about storytelling, storytelling really requires thought and care and planning. But a good story engages your audience, it excites them, it sparks new thoughts and ideas in them. And our Bible is full of them. I mean, Jesus loved telling stories. Very often when I talk about storytelling, you know, people, the immediate reaction is that that sounds really elaborate. But that's, you know, when you think about storytelling, it doesn't have to be a whole production. You can tell a story with just a picture. You can tell a story in a few words. You can sort of really think about where the story is in your work and ministry, where something really cool is happening, where the community is involved, where people are really excited and passionate about something they're doing. So that's where you can go to for possible stories. You can also ask others. Sometimes just asking a simple question on social media brings about so many different stories and responses, and people are very happy to share and tell their own stories. So sometimes you need to sort of just ask others for theirs as well. When you're thinking about stories, I think one thing to keep in mind really is to always be authentic. We are right now at ECF working on a video to sort of share who we are and what we do as an organization. And it's really been, it's been really tough, because we do a whole bunch of things and it's really hard to sort of tell our story in 7 or 8 minutes. And it's also really easy to sort of get carried away and sort of really just build ourselves up, which is always great to do also. But I think it's important to be honest and to be authentic, because our audiences and people we work with and people who know us can tell. And very often in a story, you're looking for that sort of emotional response. And the way to get it is to really be authentic and to be true. And that's something to remember when you're thinking of a story. So I want to just quickly go over a few ways you can tell stories on different platforms. So on Facebook, and this is just a screenshot of my sort of the top of my Facebook feed on my phone. Facebook has stories, basically Facebook stories, and these are basically independent of the rest of your news feed. And if you click on your image, that little circle there with the plus sign, it opens up your camera, you can take a video, you can post a picture. You can also post stuff that you have previously recorded or taken. And you can decide where to share that. It can go to sort of everyone on your feed can see it, or you can send it to specific people. Once you post it, it's there for 24 hours and then it disappears. So it's like a different feature that's at the top of your page, and it's literally called stories. So very often people use it to sort of share snippets of what they're doing during the day. And I think you could use it for like a specific event, because you can sort of show short snippets of what's going on through the day, and people can sort of scroll through that and really get a sense of what was happening. Another example that I just wanted to lift up was the Humans of New York page, and this is sort of, they have different ones for different cities around the world. And I just really think that these stories, so it's usually just, a paragraph and then a really beautiful picture, and it's usually sort of someone's face, which is just incredibly powerful when you see a picture like that, and a story about them. And it's sort of strange because on social media, we often say that, people don't like to read a lot, but because the image is so powerful, even though the text is longer than what you usually see, and you usually have to click the see more button to get the whole story, it's really powerful to see this whole story there about a person, and it really tells you, gives you an insight into this person's life. So one idea, if you want to share your mission or ministry, one way to do it might be, to use a really great picture and then a little bit of expanded text about what's going on in that picture to give people a sense of the full story. Facebook pictures is also a great way to share, to tell your story through images. Within a Facebook photo album, when you create a photo album and you upload pictures, one really cool thing is that every time you add a new picture, Facebook kind of reposts the whole album onto the news feed again. So it's a great way to bring that up onto the feed and to let people see that again. And if you're having an event, if you're doing something, you can invite other people to share, to take pictures and to send them. And you can sort of put together a photo album that really gives people a sense of what happened, and tell a story about what the event was about. Instagram is really the social media platform that I'm most, that I like the most and I use the most in my personal life. Instagram has a very similar stories feature, just like Facebook has. Again, it appears right at the top of your feed, and you can sort of tell stories and take sort of snippets of what's been happening in your day. You can look at others that you're following, and it's a great, and sometimes they're pictures, sometimes they're videos. You can sort of write things on them, you can put captions on them and put GIFs on them, and really make them fun. So I'd encourage you to play around with that. Instagram also, because it's a sort of a photo-based app and it's really about incredible pictures, basically, you really have to think about framing and how you're putting your picture up there. In these two examples I have, Instagram really encourages you to use the square format, and the reason for that is that the square format really has so much more space than the landscape format. And it really, in fact, it takes up 78% more space than a landscape format. While sometimes you need that landscape format, the two black bars above and below really sort of diminish that power that you see. So sometimes it's really good to take pictures, keeping that square format in mind. Instagram videos, unlike Facebook, which can have really long videos, Instagram videos are only 60 seconds long. So that kind of sort of constraint also allows you to really think about what kind of videos you want to share on Instagram and put together tighter and shorter videos, but still being able to tell a story in that limited amount of time. And then Twitter, we use Twitter a lot at ECF. The picture that you're seeing with the one big picture and then 3 small pictures on the side, so Twitter allows you to attach 4 images to every tweet. And I don't think that enough people take advantage of this. By doing this, you're giving people a much better sense of what's going on. And we use this a lot at like conferences or events that we're at, because it really shares sort of pictures from throughout the day. And you'll see again here, Twitter is sort of, it has a limited number of characters for text, but look at the ratio of like the space the text is taking up to the images. So when this pops up on someone's feed, they're really sort of immediately attracted to the pictures, and they will look at it, because it sort of really is taking up that much more space. Elizabeth did say a word about hashtags, and that's another thing that at ECF we use a lot. One example is that we have a conference for church leaders, and the hashtag earlier this year was Church Leaders 2018. Hashtags are really great because you can sort of track them, and when you click on anyone, it sort of pulls up everything that anyone has posted about that hashtag. So it's a really great way to get a community involved. If you're doing an event, encourage everyone to use that same hashtag, and share images or share, feedback and stuff that they want to say. As best practice, we sort of recommend that you don't use more than 2. I've seen sometimes people get carried away and have like 5 hashtags, and I feel like that really takes away from it. But if you look at all the hashtags, and if you pull up one, you can really see how altogether they can really tell a story. So let's talk for a minute again about what you can do with a limited amount of resources. So in a small church or a small organization, you more than likely have maybe one communications person or one part-time communications person, and that person is handling everything and is obviously overwhelmed. For that, we would really recommend that you focus on one primary message. What is the one thing that you're trying to tell people about what you do, or you want people to know about your church? Think about what your mission is. It should really, again, tie back to the mission. Do not try to reach everyone. So don't immediately go off and start your Facebook page and Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat, because that can really get overwhelming very fast. So figure out who your audience is and sort of start small and do that 1 or 2 things really, really well. Also think about like how you're reaching your audience. So are you, do you want to maintain a really good website and drive people to the website? Do you want to do maybe 1 newsletter a month, and really focus on that and get your information out there? Try not to do multiple things, but do a fewer things that are really of higher quality, that really give people a sense of what you do and allow them to engage with what you're doing. And then for a large church where you have a lot of resources, you have multiple people, you have a bigger budget, again, you have multiple areas of focus. And so again, it's sort of even more important to remember to come back to your strategy and think about what your focus is, what your goals are. It might be more than one, but it's easier with a larger team that are sort of juggling multiple things to lose sight of what your original strategy is. With a large church that produces many resources, or sort of does a newsletter and a website and sends out emails and creates sort of publications, I think one thing to really keep in mind is that you need to maintain brand consistency. At ECF, we have a branding guide that we always go back to when we're designing anything. It's a very simple document, and you can work with a designer to create it. So it's essentially what your preferred fonts are, what other ways you can use your logo, and sort of what are the colors that you usually use when you're producing stuff that comes out of your office. And so that's a really helpful document for when you want to put things together, and when you're producing multiple things at different times. Just a few best practices to keep in mind, because this is a lot of information. Social media can get very overwhelming if you're doing a lot. So I just wanted to share these 10 things. Don't do it all at once. If you're starting, just don't do like 3 things altogether. I remember when I first joined ECF, we had a Facebook account that was sort of doing okay, a Twitter account that was struggling a little bit, and we didn't have an Instagram account. And for almost 2 years, we didn't start an Instagram account, but we really worked on building up our Facebook account and doing better on Twitter. And so it's really important to sort of work on your strengths and really get those up to speed instead of really opening a bunch of different accounts on different social media platforms and then struggling to keep up. Post regularly, and regularly really depends. What's regular for me may not be regular for you in terms of how many times a week, for instance, but decide what works for you and then stick to that, because your audiences then begin to expect something from you, say twice a week or every Tuesday morning. And just be consistent about how you're posting. There's nothing worse than an account that has people waiting for information or waiting for something and then there's nothing there. I feel like that really sends a message. So be sure to post regularly. Be a true reflection. On social media, it's really easy to get carried away with projecting a certain image of yourself. And I know that on our personal accounts, that sometimes that's a lot easier to do. But for the same way, in the same way for your church or for your organization that you're representing, that authenticity and that honesty should always be, should always come through. And if you're sharing information and you're sharing stuff that is of value to your audience, they will respond. Listen and engage. Social media, the space of social media is really, like I said, it's a town square. And if you think about it like that, it's conversations with people. So it's not a one-way street. It's not just you putting information out there every day, sharing articles or being like, here's the newsletter or here's this thing that we were doing yesterday. But it's having a conversation. And so that means asking questions. It means responding to people who leave comments, and really using the space to build relationships. More images and more video. We all know that people respond better to images and video. At ECF, we are really trying to be more intentional about creating good quality video content and to post more visual content. People just respond better to this, and very often when they're sort of scrolling down their news feed, it really is the pictures and the videos that sort of jump out at people and that they look at. A word about video: when you create a video, make sure that you also have captions, because very often people watch videos without sound. Sometimes they sort of look at their phone, and I can't remember the percentage, but it's like above 50% of people who just watch a whole video and they don't have their headphones on or they don't listen to the sound. So unless your story is so powerful that it doesn't really need words, make sure that you have sort of closed captioning. Budget. It's important to put aside, even if it's a really small budget, to put aside some budget, some time, and some resources to get social media done the right way. More and more on Facebook, with the way things are changing, I find that you have to, especially if it's something that you really want to get out to people, it's helpful to put a little bit of money behind a post and boost it so more people can see it. You're also able to target specific groups of people based on location and age. And if you're able to even, like sometimes even $5, if you're able to put that behind a post, you're ensuring that more people, and especially the specific people that you want, are actually seeing the message that you've worked so hard on and you're putting out there on social media. Don't take yourself too seriously. And I try to remind myself of this every day. Very often we're sort of posting all this really serious stuff and this amazing stuff that we're doing. But sometimes, you know, we post like a, just, you know, how's your day going? Or like a funny picture of one of our staff members doing something. And it's so weird because those are the pictures that people just suddenly really love or engage with or make them smile. And it's sort of just a reminder to sometimes to do fun stuff and not to always sort of think about just promoting what needs to be promoted, or sort of getting your message out. Haters are gonna hate. Sometimes you will get comments that are just really, really disheartening. Sometimes they're downright like abusive. And we over here have a policy where we sort of deal with it on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes people just are really upset about something and they really have a question. And even if it's hard, you know, engaging with them offline, or sort of having a conversation, even picking up the phone and calling them, and that helps sometimes. But sometimes it's just something really just not something you want to engage with. And then in those times, we just go ahead and delete it and not worry about it anymore. Visibility. It's really important that your social media information is on your website. It has to be, because your website is really the main place where people go for information, and they should be able to immediately connect to your social media platforms from there. You should also put it, if you publish articles or you know you have other information that's going out, your social media information should be on everything. We have it on our brochures, we have it on our banners. It's a way to get people to connect to you, and every place that you can put it, you should put your social media information. And the last one is just have fun. This is a lot of stuff, and very often you can get caught up in all the just sort of thinking about how best to do things and to work things out and getting sort of meeting your goals and measuring analytics and all that stuff. But social media was never created with businesses in mind. It was created for friends to connect. It was created for people to sort of share stories about their life. And so you have to remember to also have fun with it. And just have fun, experiment and try new things. And yeah, have fun. Okay, I'm just checking the time. We're right on time. I'm gonna just share a couple of resources and then I'm gonna hand it over to Elizabeth. Hootsuite is a resource that I find really helpful. It's often referred to as a social media management tool. It's a place where you can view all your social media streams, so like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can respond to comments there, you can post stuff there. The great thing about it is that you can schedule posts. So you can, you know, if you're going off for a few days, you can schedule stuff on all your social media platforms in one sort of space. And then it'll all go out at a time that was designated by you. It's also great for a team of people working together because everyone can sort of go in and put stuff in that'll go out at different times. I also wanted to lift up a really fun website called Church Marketing Sucks. Their mission is to frustrate, educate, and motivate the church to communicate with uncompromising clarity the truth of Jesus Christ. We talked a little bit about storytelling. I just want to lift up on this site, there's a really great post called a storytelling refresher for your church. And I think that you guys might find that really helpful. Elizabeth.
I'm back, everybody. So the things that I really want to lift up as resources for you are Facebook groups. There are tons of Facebook groups available for all different types of communications, questions, crowdsourcing, and here are 3 that I love and visit on a regular basis. The first one is church communications, and as you can see, these are all hot linked so that when you guys get the slides, you can just dive right in and start participating. Church communications comes from our friends in the evangelical traditions. So it's a little bit different from Episcopal or more mainline Protestant kind of worship, obviously. But they are making really great moves in video, in tech, in social, in connecting what happens at worship to people throughout the week. And they have really great theme days, like what are you working on Wednesday, or you can't be serious Sunday, which is fantastic to hear about all the crazy things that happen to us in worship, because every week is a new experience. I, of course, would be remiss without mentioning Episcopal communicators. Of course, the membership is totally worth it for the private listserv that members can see, but they do have a Facebook group. as again, these users are definitely familiar with the Episcopal liturgy and tradition, of course. Also, nonprofit communications professionals, I think that they're a really great resource, especially for fundraising online. These are people who work in secular kind of nonprofit groups, but some of these things can work for us across the board in secular and in religious work. And then finally, as Charis mentioned, you're going to need some really great images to go with your content. And so I've linked to this imagery sizing website from Louise M. She is constantly updating any pixel requirements because they're constantly changing, and they're really hard to keep track of. And she even has templates available to you in case you aren't really quite sure how to use Photoshop or Illustrator, etc. And also one that's not here, but I want to mention because Charis talked about stories, is Adobe Spark. It's a paid program from Adobe, and it can help you with sizing for stories on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. And that's all for me.
Cool. So the last slide is just our contact information. We will obviously be meeting in the affinity group after this in the afternoon, but when you have these slides, you'll have our emails and our organization website. So feel free to email us with any other questions you might have.
Thank you guys so much. We received lots of positive message. Thanking you and being amazed at how good your presentation was. It was like really good, broad sweeping, and yet then very specific ideas at the same time. So it was wonderful. So thank you. So we have a few questions. I think Charis, you mentioned this. So Will asks, can you speak to the frequency of post by platform in relation to strategies? What is over/under posting/saturation, and when to not tag followers?
Okay.
So it's different for everyone. So
yes,
go ahead and tackle that question.
So like I said, I mean, you will figure out for yourself and for your organization what works in terms of, when you look at your audience and how responsive they are, you'll figure out how often you should post. But I can share what we do and what sort of has worked for us. Typically, we post more on Facebook just because we think that that's where the majority of our audiences are. And they, at no point have we sort of heard feedback to say that this is too much, you need to stop. So typically, we post on Facebook between 3 to 5 times a day, different times of the day. There will be days when there isn't anything, and so on those days it'll just be maybe one post, but typically there's always something new on our Facebook feed. Depending on, again, how people are, how many people are on Twitter, or how many people you're able to reach, or how much of your audience is on Twitter, I would say, less than 5 tweets a day works for us, not more than that. I find that on Twitter, because of the way the timeline sort of moves, you can get away with posting more stuff. Very often we post sort of older articles, and we do like Throwback Thursday and things like that on Twitter. And on Instagram, we're still new on Instagram. We've been doing it for about a year now. On Instagram, we sort of wait until we have a really good picture, because I feel like if you share a not so great picture, it's just not, it doesn't work on Instagram. So we actually post the least on Instagram. But we do go in and sort of look at what other people are doing, and often sort of like or repost stuff that people are doing on Instagram as well. Sorry, Sarah, was there another part to the question I've forgotten?
I think you covered it, but I think when to tag followers. I think
yes, yes.
That was a follow-up.
Right. We typically don't tag followers, and this is just something that we do we don't do at ECF. What we do is so we have people who write for us and blog for us and stuff. So what we like doing is we tag them if it's an article that they've written, because very often we get questions that are specific to that article, and then the person who's written it, because they're tagged, they're able to then respond, and we don't have to respond on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. So Joyce had a question about Hootsuite or Buffer or any of those content management systems. So Joyce says, I've heard that posts scheduled via Hootsuite have less power in Facebook's algorithm, so these posts are less likely to appear in someone's feed. Is that urban legend?
I really hope it's urban legend because I wasn't aware of that, but what I can say is that if there's something that you want more people to see on Facebook, I would suggest to go ahead and boost that post. Put a little bit of money behind it, because more and more I'm noticing on Facebook is that you know, unless it's sort of really great video content or it's sort of a live video, you do need to put a little bit of money behind it to get the eyeballs that you need. One word about Hootsuite that I wasn't able to say before is that it's great that you can schedule stuff and sort of go away for a week and not worry about it. But we have had one time where, you know, something happened in the real world that would have made that post that we were sending out very inappropriate. So you do have to, you know, even if you schedule something, you do need to keep an eye on what's going on, and then, you know, maybe go in and change that or reschedule, and sort of not just forget about it, because sometimes you've done it a week before and then something happens and then you don't want that post to go out that day.
Ooh, it's nerve-wracking.
In there.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody want to attempt to tackle Snapchat? So there were a few different options, and I would spend like about 2 minutes on it, so then that way we can give everybody a break and get set up. But know that Elizabeth and Charis will both be facilitating the communications affinity group, which is going to happen at 12:30. So you will be able to pick their brains even more and talk about Snapchat even more at 12:30, because everyone wants to talk about Snapchat, I know. There's just a few about like how to take screenshots, and then sort of the general ideas, strategies for Snapchat. Have you all found anything good?
So I'm familiar with some applications that will help you track snaps on Snapchat. The only thing is that most of these are not kosher in the Snapchat API. And so using those can affect your account. And that is something that I want to emphasize. You can be kicked off of Snapchat for using something that is against their terms of service. There are things that are available there. You can pay for them through the different app stores, and I can find some specific apps for both Android and iPhone based and kind of get those together for the affinity groups later, if that's okay. Perfect. I was speaking to Chris Redicator, who's a student worker in CMT, and he told me about how, for the person who wants to know why to use it, how young people in the church that he served at as the youth and family minister developed their own kind of game using Snapchat to be present in worship. So they would look for specific things that were happening in worship and share those things with each other via Snapchat, and with Chris, of course, on Snapchat. And I think that that can be a good way to kind of connect young people to worship, where they're fully present and fully kind of participating, but still make it reaching them on a level that they're comfortable with. And I can get more details from him later to share in the affinity groups as well.
I think when Chris and I have talked about it, it is a lot of broadcasting out rather than one-on-one communication. So then that way there's the accountability aspect to it. And the new feature, as I see Chris walking in, is that you can do groups now on Snapchat. So it's, yeah, and he's nodding for me, is that you can sort of have sort of like a group text message chain. You can have a group Snapchat chain. There's a better word for it, but it's not coming to mind. All right, so Charis and Elizabeth will be ready to go for this. Oh, quick, Will says that they've heard rumors of General Convention introducing new social media policies for the Episcopal Church. Maybe Will, what you're thinking of is that there was a revision to the safeguarding rules, and they have suggestions for how you can interact with people on social media. So this can be found on the Forma website or on the General Convention website under the report section. So, I know we're going to be doing a boot camp workshop on it in the fall. And then we're also going to be talking about, we'll also do a webinar on social media guidelines and how to interact with young people. So don't worry, it's always a good question to ask and it's always changing. So we like to keep on top of it. So, okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and give a big thank you to Charis and Elizabeth